So today, what we're going to talk about is completing the square. And the first thing is, why in the world would I ever want to complete the square? It's my personal favorite because when I graph these things, this method, the vertex form, is the easiest way for me to graph something. I can pull the vertex out of there, the axis of symmetry. With my A value, I can go from my vertex to the next 2 points, and I know it's a U. In standard form, which is how we're given most of this stuff, we end up having to like make a table of values, and it just ends up being a little bit messy. So I prefer vertex form, and I will go to vertex form over everything else. So first thing you guys should be able to do rather quickly is label your A, B, and C. So I'm going to pause recording because it's going to end up being 45 minutes long if I don't. And you guys go ahead and take a second to do that. Okay, so there are the values for A, B, and C. At this point in your mathematical career, that should be like easy. Just make sure you're on the right side of the equation. Make sure that you're accounting for negatives and when there's not an x term of 0. So we're going to keep going. Now, here are the steps for completing the square. I wrote them out and I typed them so you wouldn't have to worry about writing all this stuff. But essentially, we want everything with the x's on one side and the y and the numbers on the other side. If a is not equal to 1, that means the number in front of x squared is not equal to 1. I'm going to divide each term in the equation by a. If not, I'm just going to skip it. Then I'm going to label my b. And then in order to complete the square, and you might not understand this right now, I'm going to take half a b, square it, add the result to both sides of the equation, because whatever I do to one side of the equation, I got to do to both sides. And then I'm going to factor it as a trinomial square, combining like terms on both sides of the equation, and move c back over and putting it into vertex form. So what does that really look like? I don't know why it's not moving for me. Okay, so when I look at example 2, step 1 is I'm going to move that 18 to the other side. And I try to write the steps on the left and show you the math on the right. So here, then it was, A was 1, so I just skipped that step. So I no longer have to worry about that. Then I go down. B is negative 12. So I take negative 12, I divide by 2, and I square it. And I get negative 6 squared, which is positive 36. I add positive 36 to both sides of the equation. Combining like terms on the left, negative 18 plus 36 is positive 18. Over here, because this is a minus sign, I copy the sign, and this becomes, it's also up here, this minus 6, x minus 6 squared. That's the whole reason I do this, is because I'm forcing it into that pattern of a perfect square trinomial. And then I just move the 18 back over, and magically, I'm in vertex form. So it works out pretty nice. And of course, it's still going to do that. But I did that so you guys could see everything. We're going to scroll down. I'm going to do one more example with you, probably not with all the steps on the left. But let's try one more. So step 1 tells me to move that 32 over. So I'm going to get y plus 32 equals x plus 8x. Step 2 tells me to take the b, which is 8, divide it by 2, and square it, and I get 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. And now that I've done that, I forced it. The entire reason I did this was this right here is a positive 4. This becomes x plus 4 squared. That's why I did it. I'm forcing it into a perfect square trinomial. Move the 48 back over. And that's what I get. Now that makes it nice and easy for me to graph it, to actually solve this thing. At this point, to solve it, I don't have to factor anymore. I can just add 48 to 0. Over here, take the square root of both sides, and I have my answer. So it kind of makes it a whole lot easier to solve, makes it a whole lot easier to do a lot of other things. When I put this packet together, I managed to accidentally flip the homework and the notes classwork. They're pretty much identical, but the only difference is one says notes. You'll see it on the back. So I'm going to run through not the notes classwork. I'm going to do the homework, and you guys are going to be responsible for the notes classwork. Does that make sense? Yes. We're just changing the title of them because I put them in there wrong. So on the one that says homework, this is really our classwork notes. I'm going to do the odds, and you guys are going to do the evens, and we're going to do them about the same time to make sure you guys are understanding what's going on. Step one is I need to come up with what is C. So I take the number here, 34, I divide by 2, I get 17. And I square it, and I get, what's 17 times 17? 289? And that's my C value. Going down to number 3, I'm going to take my B value of negative 24. I'm going to divide it by 2. I get 12, and I square it, and I get 144. Okay, so I want you guys to do 2 and 4 real quick. What'd you guys get for 2? Yep. And what'd you get for 4? Yep. 144. Thanks. So the next 3, it wants me to write it in vertex form. Doesn't want me to solve, just wants me to write in vertex form. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This one, it would say n squared plus 10n equals 11. Just to kind of keep it on both sides of the equation. And I moved it over. It was a negative, got a positive. I take 10. I divide by 2. I square it, and I get 25. So that tells me that I am going to add 25 on both sides of the equation. When I do that, the whole purpose of me doing that was for this pattern to happen. And if you guys haven't figured this one out, I'm going to take the number I got when I divided by 2, and it's going to be n positive 5 squared equals 36. I'm going to move that 36 back over. And now I'm in vertex form. Number 7. Step 1, I'm going to move the 36 over. Then I'll even do it in a totally different color. I take the negative 16, divide by 2, I get negative 4, square it, and I get 16. I'm going to add 16 to both sides. Actually, I did that wrong, didn't I? Yes, ma'am. What did I do wrong? I divided, didn't I? I got negative 4. It's negative 8. What's negative 8 squared? Positive 64, thanks. So I'm going to add 64 to both sides. I get really fast and happy and make little mistakes. So the whole purpose of me doing that is on this side, when I divided by 2, I got a negative 8. So that makes this whole thing b minus 8 squared. When I add these two numbers together, I get 100. So this becomes b minus 8 squared minus 100 equals 0, or y, but I just happen to leave the y off. Last one I'm going to do with you. So let's see, then I'm going to put up the answers. I'm going to start by moving the 48 over. K squared plus 16k equals negative 48. I'm going to take that 16, which is positive, divided by 2 and get 8. 8 squared, 64. And I'm going to add 64 to both sides of that equation. The entire reason I do that is so that it magically gets to a perfect square trinomial boom, 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 the left side becomes k plus 4 squared. The right side becomes k plus, I see, I keep doing that. Let's fix it this way. K plus 8. And sometimes I do make mistakes. It is a Monday morning. That's where the 8 comes from. At least you caught it really early this time. K plus 8 squared equals 64 minus 48 is, yes. Negative what?
Oh, wait, no, positive 16.
Positive 16. Move it over. K plus 8 squared equals, not equals, see, keep doing it. Minus 16 equals 0. So go ahead and take a second and try the ones on the left. Okay, so these are the 3 problems you're supposed to do. Make sure that you got them right. I'm going to move it up. It probably won't move. Oh, it moved up this time. Okay, so the last 4 problems are asking you not only to complete the square, but also to solve them. So we're going to do 2 of these together. We're going to say n squared plus 4n equals negative 3. Then I'm going to take the 4, divide by 2. Squared, I get 4. I'm going to add 4 on both sides. I get n plus 2 squared equals 1. I do not have to move that 1 back over. I am solving. My goal is to get n by itself. So if this is squared, what do I do to unsquare something? I take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root, and this is super duper important, what ends up happening? When I take the square root, I have to have a plus or minus 1. I have to. That's just the way it works. So now I can solve these 2 equations, and there are 2 here. I have n plus 2 equals 1, and n plus 2 equals negative 1. When I solve them, I just subtract 2. I get n equals negative 1. Subtract 2, n equals negative 3. And those are my 2 answers. I'm going to do one more problem. So let's go move the 7 over. Then I take the negative 8, divide by 2, squared, and I get 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. I get p minus 4 squared equals, thank you. I was going to say it has to equal something normally nicer than that. And it equals 9. So once it equals 9, what do I do to both sides? I have to take the square root. When I take the square root, I get a plus or minus. And I'm left with p minus 4 equals plus or minus 3. So I have 2 equations. P minus 4 equals 3, and p minus 4 equals negative 3. I add 4 to both sides, p equals 7. Add 4 to both sides, p equals 1. Yep. So I want you guys to go ahead and try number 12 and 14 real quick. Okay, so those are the answers. You guys can go ahead and check yourself. I would highly recommend that you actually complete the square and try this and see if you can get the right answer instead of just copying down the right answer and just going with it. In your homework, what you will notice is it's the exact same. I want 4 of them where you guys are just finding the C, kind of stair-stepping into this. Once you can find the C, go ahead and just put it in vertex form. Pretty important for graphing. And then 4 more problems like that. Then you have your homework assignment number 2, which says pretty much you're going to be solving these for x using completing the square. It's a whole bunch like the last one. Some of these you might want to skip. We're going to go over some more, like if A is not 1, maybe skip them until next class or try them, see what happens. I think most of these are going to be like that. The biggest difference is if you can divide through by 3, you're fine because it just makes it. If you're solving, you can just divide through. You don't have to factor anything out. So for example, this problem right here where it says 3x plus 2 plus 36x equals negative 42, I can divide everything by 3 and then it just becomes like the other problems. So if you can do that, do it. If you get like a decimal, it might be a little bit harder and you can skip some of them, but skip around. Also, I said you only had to do column A for right now. So just give you some work.